Now, the next thing that happens, right? You've got all these vague goals. That's all they are at this time. They're literally just vague goals. We need to actually be very specific with these, right? And we generally, it's very, like, you literally, if you go on any personal training search in the fucking world, they're going to talk about SMART goal setting, right? So it's an acronym, S.M.A.R.T, right? Now, some of these, the actual word that's used is changed around depending on where you learn it, but it's basically all the same concept, right? So when we're looking at goals, right now, all we have vague goals. We've just written them down. Like, I want to climb Kilimanjaro. I want to do X, Y, Z, right? They're just goals. They're vague. You might be like, okay, I have them roughly mapped to a timeline, but even still, they're vague. Well, we need to be very specific with these. Now, you can argue that you could do this step before you map them to a timeline. I sometimes do that with clients, but oftentimes I will do it the way we've just described it and be like, let's just see what you think is possible. Let's actually just get an idea with this stuff where you think, the next few years are going to look like for you, right? But then we go, okay, we have these main goals, we have these main buckets, and then we have these like subcategory goals, right? What we want to do with those goals, again, first of all, let's prioritize them, because you can have a million priorities, but if you have a million priorities and no structure to that, you're never going to get anything done, because you're going to be looking in a million directions rather than in a 1 to 3 direction. So we need to know what is more important so you can prioritize your time, right? Because your time, ultimately, you can't get it back unless someone listening to this has some sort of time travel device. If so, I'm in. Literally just get in touch. But unless you have a time travel device, you are always going to be time poor. That's, unfortunately, we don't have infinite resources with regard to time. Now, I might, because there's a non-zero probability that this is the universe that I live to be a billion. So it's a possibility. So I might have a lot of time, but for most people, we're talking you have 80 years, maybe 90, right? To achieve all you want to achieve. And that might seem like a large amount of time. But if you think about that, literally, if you're listening to this on the Monday, I am turning 30 on the 8th of January, so the Saturday. And that means that I'm 30. And if I'm only going to live to 90, that means I'm a third of my life through. Right? Which is kind of scary to think about, right? Now, me personally, I'm probably going to live to 120, so I'm actually only a quarter of my life through. But for most people, if you're 30, that's a third of your life, right? Now, it's a little bit hard to conceptualize that because, for the first, let's say 15 years of your life, 16 years of your life, it's kind of just you've had the game, unless obviously, you're in a really bad environment or whatever, but you've had the game on easy mode, It basically like you've had that. If you ever play video games, it's like level 1 and it's just like everything is easy. It's a tutorial. That's what you've been in for the first 16 years or so of your life, right? You've been in the tutorial mode. It's easy. It's like, here, this is how you do this thing. This is how you navigate the life, right? So it's hard to kind of conceptualize the next 30 years because you don't have that easy level there as well. So it's a little bit different. But either way, again, you've only got 90 years to accomplish everything. So we need to have that priority list. We need to be like, this is what I actually care about. And again, it goes back to plan into the future, plan into the past. You might be at this stage in your life where you're like, you know what, actually, I don't want kids, right? Like, say, for example, myself and Gary, if we had kids right now, it would actually be incredibly disruptive to our business, to our goals, everything. But I would be very happy if I had kids. So I'd be willing to have that trade-off. I'd be like, okay, yeah, we need to make this work. We need to change a few things around. But my priority list is like that family. I'm like, that's what I care about the most. It might not align with my timeline that I thought things were going to happen, but I don't care, because that's my number one priority. So you need to look at that priority list and go, what do I actually care about, right? And then we need to use that SMART goal setting. So you've got your priorities, you've got your goals. We need to break those goals down into a few categories. And again, we'll go to this SMART goal setting, right? Before I get on to that, Gary, do you have anything to say in terms of prioritization?
No, let's go with the SMART.
SMART, right? So what we're talking about with SMART, it's basically an acronym for the S stands for specific, right? And again, you heard earlier on, Gary kept saying, we need to be specific, right? And we'll come back to what that means in a second. The second thing we need from our goals is it needs to be measurable, right? So you might think you're being specific with a goal and you might say fat loss, right? What are we measuring? What's the metric of success with fat loss, right? Weight loss is an even better one, right? You're like, oh, I just want to lose weight, right? Is that actually a proxy for what you want? or is that actually what you want? Right? Because we say this often, where it's like, a lot of people come to us and they say, oh, I want to go for weight loss. That's what I want weight loss, right? And they're purely looking at it from a scale perspective, right? And, I've seen it before. You get someone to lose 10 kilos, 20 kilos, and they're still not happy because they're like, okay, well, I lost the weight. I didn't actually accomplish the physique that I wanted. I was prioritizing the weight on the scales, but that was really only a proxy for what I actually wanted, which was a certain physique, right? So we need to, first of all, have measurable goals. Now, weight loss goal is a measurable goal. It's like, okay, well, what's the goal? Oh, I want to lose 10 kilos. That's measurable. But we have to be aware of, is that actually a specific enough goal in the first place, right? So those two things are very tied in together, having a specific goal that is measurable. And then sometimes you're not going to be able to measure what your actual goal is. Like, again, health is one that often is very hard to measure. And this is why it can be very vague. Again, we're grasping at that ether when we're talking about health. But there are metrics we can use. Again, sometimes they're proxy metrics and sometimes they don't capture everything. But if you're saying, I want to improve my health, we can be like, okay, well, and we're going to do this in a few episodes' time. We can be like, these are the things that generally kill people. So if we're going to improve your health, we're going to be resilient to these things. We're going to try to not get you to die from these things. So we have proxy measures for those things. For example, you might be like, I don't want to die. I want to be healthy. And heart disease kills a lot of people. So we might be like, okay, well, I don't actually have a measure of heart disease. There's no measure for that. But there are other measures that we're like, these are in the we'll call it the causal pathway, or the overall pathway that leads you to heart disease in the short and long term. So we might use, okay, you want to be healthy, let's get a blood panel, let's look at blood lipids, for example. I'd be like, okay, my LDL is a little bit elevated, I'm going to get that to a healthier place. Boom, now we know we've got a measurable metric towards improving your health. Again, specific and measurable, right? The next thing, and this is a really hard thing, where you don't know what you don't know, and unfortunately that leads you to making poor decisions, right? The next thing in that SMART acronym is achievable, right? You actually have to set achievable goals. And again, coming back to this health and fitness world, very often we'll have clients come to us, and you see it all the time in just the general fitness world. People will say stuff like, oh, I want to gain 10 kilos of muscle this year. I want to look like Phil Heath, and you're looking at the guy and he's 5'2", and it's just never going to happen. So our goals have to be achievable, right? And that's both achievable in terms of the end result, right? What's the actual end result? But then also achievable in the time that you're allocating towards them, right? Like, you might have the ability to look like the next Phil Heath, you might be like, actually, you have fantastic genetics for this, right? But you're not going to accomplish it in the next 5 years. It's going to take you 10 years, right? So we're looking at that achievable thing. We're looking at it not only in terms of the end result, but also in terms of the time that you have allocated for this thing, right? Relevant, right? The goal actually has to be relevant, right? Like, again, you could be like, yeah, I've prioritized my life. I've prioritized all these different things, and I've done all this stuff. And then you have this random goal, and it's like, this is not relevant to anything that you're working on. This is not relevant to your life, and we might have a specific goal in terms of, I don't know, you might be like, oh, I want to gain muscle, right? And I want to do X, Y, Z. And we might have determined that certain exercises just don't work for you. You might be like, oh, the squat, it's just not a great exercise. It just contributes way too much fatigue to your system. And it's not really giving us the return on investment in terms of muscle building, which is your main goal here, right? But you might have a goal just because you've been influenced by the fitness industry to say, oh, you must squat, right? So you have squat goals. You're like, these are the specific goals I want to do for a squat. It's measurable. I want to do 200 kilos. It's achievable. My previous best squat was 160, and I'd only been training for 8 months. So, 200 kilos, maybe that is achievable for me in the next 2 years, whatever. But it might not be relevant to your actual goal, right? So it has to be relevant. Now, we can still focus on that, right? But the reason we bring in relevant is because we have to acknowledge now that there is a trade-off occurring, right? You might be like, okay, I really want to get this squat goal, but as a result of really chasing that, we have to go, now you are encountering far more systemic fatigue. That might actually take away from our ability to focus on your main goal, which is muscle building. And while we obviously will get some muscle building from the squat, I'm not saying it's a bad muscle builder at all. It might not be the optimal way for you to build muscle in terms of what you actually want to achieve, right? So again, that relevant aspect, it's very hard, just like achievable, it's very hard to know what you don't know ahead of time, right? And again, this is oftentimes when we're going through this stuff with clients, this is the stuff we have to discuss, right? And then the final thing, and it really ties in back with when we're creating that timeline, there has to be some sort of time bounding for this goal, right? If you have a vague goal, I want to lose 10 kilos, like that's cool, right? Great. We've got specifics. We were like, we want to lose 10 kilos, you want to look like this, blah, blah, blah. We've got it all mapped out. But if that's just an open-ended goal, like there's no reason for you to prioritize it, right? This is why you see people diet for 2 years straight, and they're up and down and they're up and down. It's like, yeah, it's because you didn't go, right, the next 8 weeks, I just want to have accomplished this, it's done. After those 8 weeks, I'm focusing on something else, we need to have some sort of time bounding. Now, again, this is hard because the goal needs to be achievable, and most people are just really bad at setting achievable goals. So you might have a weight loss goal and you might say, yeah, I want to lose, 10 kilos in the next 4 weeks. And for most people, that's just going to be reckless and not achievable. So while you might have, ticked through all of these things, technically you didn't go through them right, because achievable, it wasn't, achievable when we put the time bounding on it, right? Like losing 10 kilos, that might be achievable. Losing 10 kilos in 4 weeks, it's possible, but it's probably not the best way to go about this stuff, unless your goal is to be like, all right, I am a fucking, I don't know, a fighter or something, and I've got to fight last minute. I need to lose these 10 kilos. I shouldn't have got this far out of shape, but this is a big deal for me. It's, something that's going to improve my fighting prospects, my career. We might be like, okay, we've got a trade-off here. It's time bound. We have 4 weeks. We need to lose these 10 kilos. Here's the methods we're going to employ. It's not optimal, but it is what it is, right? So we have to look at that stuff. In that circumstance, almost always that person will just gain those 10 kilos back in fucking 2 weeks, because it's been so aggressive. It's been so, while you can plan it out nicely and effectively, it's generally not something that people sustain. It's generally leads to overeating out the back end of that, right? So that's what we need to do.